I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if anyone joins us, they are, of course, welcome to pop in here. So this is getting executive buy-in specifically for education and training leaders in business. And if you haven't yet seen me, I'm Vicki Kennedy, the CEO of Ectus. So I'll talk a little bit more about my background, and I'll be getting into my my career journey. So this is a little bit more of if you have seen me, I tend to do webinars and presentations that are kind of instructional, just the nature of what I do. This one I think maybe a little more TED Talky, a little bit more like sharing my experience, but I don't know. It'll probably still come across once a teacher, always a teacher. So anyway, just a little bit of introduction of who I am. So I have about 22 years of experience so far in education spaces, originally in higher education, and then about 2013 moved into the tech space and in the corporate space. Since that time, I've led pretty large scale initiatives at big tech like Amazon and Meta. And also in one of my roles was a consultant for some other big tech companies that you see there. I've been in and around the industry for a while, published some things in training industry and training magazine, and I've been doing some speaking and podcast appearances over the years. So all that's to say, that's where my experience is coming from as I speak about these things. I have pretty wide range of the type of work I've been doing as well, beyond just the education piece. I've held product roles, so I've done the ed tech product side of the business. I've held, of course, the practitioner role as an educator, program management roles, and then in more recent years, executive leadership roles. So I'm kind of bringing all that together in anything that I share in a webinar. And in this particular webinar, I'm going to be speaking both as someone who's been in the executive seat, and then, of course, someone who's worked to get that buy-in over the course of my career. So I did launch Ectus, which is my business that I'll talk about towards the end, last fall. And on a personal note, I live in Woodstock, New York with my wife and my Dalmadoodle and cranky old cat, and that is Dalmadoodle. She is half Dalmatian, half poodle. So that's, I don't know, if you learn nothing else in this webinar, then you've learned what a Dalmadoodle is. They're pretty damn cute. Cute and a lot of work. She's a Velcro dog. Okay. So the agenda for this webinar is starting first with the need for executive buy-in. Why am I here talking about this? What is the relevance to especially those in the training and education roles? And then talking a bit about education as a strategy, specifically, and the link between education and business goals. Then, of course, moving into the blueprint or the process that I've typically followed to get executive buy-in, moving into the more specific aspects of my experience of how I put that process into practice. And then I do want to end with how to show ROI in education, because this is a pretty big topic. I've done other presentations on that topic specifically, so we could do an entire webinar just on showing ROI. But of course, it is relevant when we're looking at how to get that executive buy-in. So just managing all my screens here. Okay. So let's talk about why it matters. Why this webinar? Why this topic? And why does someone need to think about getting executive buy-in? And really, the thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that education is a strategic function. And when education is a strategic function, then getting that executive buy-in is really necessary for growth. So what we mean by that, and we look, and this is the part where I said, see, I am still an educator at heart, can't help it. But there's typically two types of functions: strategic functions and operational functions. And of course, there can be some overlap and some nuances outside of this. And there's an element of strategy to any role. But generally speaking, we have the operational functions, which drive delivery of business objectives and are really the everyday activities and commitments that we see across a company. So those are going to be typically roles in the production side, logistics, IT roles, servicing, financing. And so while executive buy-in is important for any individual and any role for a variety of reasons, those roles tend to be a bit more defined and a bit more the investment in them is judged by how well they are moving those everyday needles of the business. Whereas your strategic functions, those are the ones that really help drive the business for the long run. So we're talking about this long run view, and we're helping a business make change with strategic functions. We're adding value with strategic functions. So I have here that we're adding value for customers, owners, employees, strategic functions tend to lead to growth, improved services, and greater market share. But immediately with strategic functions, you can see that we're thinking it almost feels like very large and slightly, or I should say, not as defined as your operational functions. And that's where the conversation around getting that buy-in, around understanding the ROI, around really knowing when to invest or to remove investment from these kind of functions becomes less clear than it does for some of the more sort of operationalized functions. And you may think, well, with education and training, there is an operational aspect of it because we can look at, for example, training customers or onboarding a customer. And there is a sense of operational aspect to that where it's like they have to be trained and this is, it's done or not done. But as education leaders, it's really in your best interest to demonstrate the strategic value of education at a business. And that's where you can really get that buy-in for more growth, for more investment, for more resources. So ultimately, while a company may see education or training operationally, it's an opportunity for you to help the company see and help executives see the strategic aspect of education. And therefore, the measures of success for that become larger than whether it's done or not done and really how it's supporting the operations of the business. So I've talked, again, if you've heard me before, this may be something you've heard me say before or write before, but this is kind of one of the things that I speak about is that education and business tends to fall in one of these three. And of course, some overlap between them as anything does. But there's education for compliance, which we all know is typically your like HR audited, HR IT type of trainings that are typically for auditing purposes or legal purposes. So we're not going to talk really about that. That's a very specific kind of use of education. There's probably a whole conversation we could have about the value of that and how that could be improved. But we see education for compliance. And then the two that are more common that are probably more familiar with those of you on the call is education as a service. So education that is packaged as essentially a product and it's sold to customers and it's directly revenue generating. And so the goals of that are going to be connected to the sale of the learning and the upsell and cross-sell and resell of that learning as a primary goal. And then education as a strategy, which is using education to achieve other goals. So that's actually using education to do things like increasing customer retention or performance or sales performance or reducing cost or expanding market share. We'll talk about all those. But those are the two that are a little bit more common, especially in the customer education space and partner education space. And so again, why I'm talking about this in this webinar is when we think about getting executive buy-in, this is really relevant. Are we in education as a service or as a strategy? Because the approach to getting buy-in will be quite different. My personal experience is going to be education as a strategy. I have never worked in a situation where I've directly sold or directly monetized the education. And I will say it's not that that we couldn't. It was that the value was greater with education as a strategy. So it was actually a trade-off. That's a whole nother webinar as well that I could do on those two. But I'm just letting you know my experience is more using it strategically to drive the long-term value and long-term success. So that's all going to be kind of relevant as I talk through my process. So talking specifically about education as a strategy, again, this is when you are looking for that buy-in, it's really about articulating the value that you as an individual and your team and or your program is driving strategically. And the most important thing, in my experience, to understand is the business strategy that you're supporting, is the organizational strategy. And depending on the size of your organization, you're going to have potentially, a very wide like corporate strategy and then strategies within each business unit, strategies within each function within those business units. And if you're at a smaller company, you still have like a business strategy and then different departments and different teams have their strategies that support that. So you're probably familiar with strategy in general, but just kind of recapping that we have this hierarchy where we have the ultimate vision and then the mission and values that support reaching that vision. And then the goals, there's going to be those primary goals, like the year-long goals for the organization, and then probably a 3 to 5 year plan for the organization. The strategy is how the business plans to achieve those goals. So at a high level, if you have, if there's a goal to expand to a new market, The strategy is going to be, well, how are we going to do that? Are we going to use certain, marketing campaigns to reach that new segment or that new market? Are we going to change our product or pivot our product or expand our product to appeal to that new segment? So it's basically the choices that an organization makes to achieve that particular goal. And you might imagine this is where education comes into play. And education can very well be one of those strategic drivers to reach that goal. So, again, we may use education to educate that new market that we're trying to expand. And so we're going to launch a campaign or a program specifically tied to that goal. But this is really, really relevant and important because you have to understand what executives care about, what their goals are, and what their thought is, their strategies are for achieving those goals, to talk basically the language of the executive. And that's how you can kind of connect in what you're doing and what you want to do and what you have been doing to this broader mission. So first and foremost, the most important thing is really understanding that business strategy. And depending on where you fall in the organization, if you have a higher level role, higher leadership role, then it may be not too difficult to know and learn what this is. And of course, if you are in a larger organization, have a role that's kind of several layers away from leadership, then it may be more challenging to learn what this is, but that's the goal, right? That's the goal, is to start having those conversations, start learning what you can, and talking to leaders and talking to department heads and talking to other managers to really understand what's going on here. Some businesses are clearly better with the transparency of their strategy than others. I've worked in all kinds. I've worked at some that are super transparent. This is everything we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And this is how it's going. And then others that are really kind of not that transparent at all, and you sort of have to guess. But this is just fundamental to getting executive buy-in, is understanding what the executives care about, what they're doing, and what the plans are and how it's going. So I wanted to really talk about that first, because nothing else will make sense if we're not on the same page with this general strategy. So now let's kind of switch into my experience, how I've done it, and talk a little bit about some of the specifics from that. Okay. This may actually be a shorter webinar. You never know. Okay, so my process, and I have these as bullet points. They are not numbered for a reason. This is not a step-by-step playbook. This is not about a very, very specific process where first do this, then do that, then do this, because as you might imagine, a lot of these things happen in parallel, in tandem, different timelines. It's really just different tactics that I've taken to get this executive buy-in that I've gotten over the years. So I'm going to talk through, I'm going to talk through each of these, and then again, I'm going to come back in a few minutes to talk about like specific examples of this. But the first one being learning what the executives care about. So as I just mentioned in the last slide, first and foremost is doing the research to understand all of this. So I don't need to repeat all that again, but that's really the most important sort of fundamental aspect to get executive buy-in. Understand the executive, understand what they care about, and understand what motivates them. And of course, different executives, different leaders are going to have different things that they care about, not just the organizational strategy. That's, of course, fundamental. But depending on the executive's role, like a CMO is going to have a different stake in it than a CPO, right? Chief Product Officer, and a CEO, depending on how large your organization is, you're understanding these different executives. You may have direct connection with them, or again, you may be several layers below, but really understanding what, as much as you can about those individuals. So before I continue with that, I have here on the right side just the plug for a book that I don't have any connection to, but I refer this book to a lot of people that I've coached over the years or mentored. It's called Influence Without Authority, if you've never heard of it. So that is just a graphic from the book that really talks about how you need to understand what motivates others, right? So I won't go through that whole thing that you see here, but it starts with, of course, assuming potential allies, clarifying your own goals and priorities. And then the relevant part here for this is diagnosing the world of the other person. identifying relevant currencies, theirs and yours. And a currency the book goes on to talk about is really essentially like the motivating factors that people have. So some people are motivated by recognition, promotion, being called out publicly for their performance. And some people are more recognized, privately for just maybe a one-on-one with their boss. Some people want to have a greater scope. Some people just want to have clarity in their own scope. So individuals have different things that they care about. And this book is a really great tool to really understand how to do that, how to understand that, not just with getting executive buy-in, but just really any kind of influence laterally across an organization where you don't have direct leadership over someone. So I like to recommend that book because it's really got some great stuff in it, and I do find it to be quite relevant to this conversation. It also goes on to talk about relationships and how to make those network connections, which is the second bullet point. So super important is finding your advocate, your support, your evangelizer, whatever words you want to use there. If you are a few layers below, the leadership team that calls the shots, then sometimes your advocate is your manager, the one layer above you, who's more connected to that, or 2 layers above you, skip manager, depending on the terms you use there. But finding that person that's going to advocate, that believes in what you're doing, and that's going to be your voice in the decision-making leadership circles. So again, maybe you already are in those decision circles, and that's great. But if you're not, finding that advocate who's going to advocate for you, and it's not just finding that person. Obviously, it's about fostering that relationship, making sure that they understand, that they believe the value that you and your team and your program, et cetera, is providing the company. So you start with that advocate. It's not about like finding the CEO necessarily and like sitting at the leadership table, but it's finding that one person that's going to advocate for you. And I can talk about some of my experiences with that in a few minutes. So parallel with those 2 things is building trust and confidence. Kind of a no-brainer, but if you're going to get buy-in to do something more, to do something bigger, to do something longer, then you need to show that what you've been doing, that you're trustworthy, that you think that the team can have confidence in investing in you, because essentially you're asking for that investment in you. Even if it's to build more of a team, it's that you have the sort of ability to manage that team. And so that's, typically just doing what you say you're going to do and showing the impact of what you've already done. And that's why I wanted to talk about ROI a little bit later in this webinar. But building that trust and confidence, again, connecting that to the advocate first. So you have that direct relationship, that person believes in what you're doing and can be your voice. That's just been a repeatable factor in my own experience. So sort of related to that is demonstrating long-term and repeatable results. So again, if you are going to be asking for that buy-in, you want to show that this is not just a one-off, like, we did it once and we can do it again, but demonstrating that this is something that can be repeatable, something that is a long-term lasting benefit to the business. Because when we invest, we want to see something that is more of a long-term return, essentially. And then another really important piece, I do like to talk a lot about strategy because it's so important here, but that 5th bullet point is aligning with other teams on their strategic goals, especially coming back to education and training. The fact that education can support so many different goals across a business. If you can connect what you're doing to the goals of another team or another department, that is going to immediately elevate your chances of getting buy-in to do more of what you want to do. So as an example, we already talked about like the marketing example. If the marketing team is going to be going after a new expanded, market or different target, different demographic, connecting with that to show how education can drive that goal is going to really help your own story of getting that buy-in. Same on the customer side. Maybe there is a push across the product team. Actually, let's talk about the product team. Maybe there's a push across, oh my goodness, a push across the product team to get a new feature out there. And if you can connect into that goal and show like, well, if we, craft this educational initiative or program to drive that, then we could help you with this product adoption. Again, that's going to really help with your own case. So it's kind of related to this graphic. You want to understand what's important to other people, other teams, other departments, and you kind of piggyback and connect into their strategic goals. It will only help elevate your own case. for that buy-in. So it's really just about making sure you're not asking for buy-in on something that is just kind of selfishly something you want to do, which I imagine not many people would, but just kind of reframing that we want to make sure that it's really about a mutual benefit of course, something I'm assuming that you're passionate about. That's been my experience, but also finding the connection to this greater goal. So another point here is proactively addressing questions or concerns. There should be a slash there or a comma. Proactively addressing questions and or concerns, we'll say. So if you're going to be asking for buy-in, you're going to be speaking to some team, whether it's your boss or your boss's boss or whoever it is, thinking ahead about any questions that may come up, any objections that may come up, any concerns that may come up is going to be in your best interest. And I want to talk in a next slide about a method for doing that. But this comes from having conversations with a lot of other leaders, a lot of other managers to understand what kind of questions may come up. You don't want to just guess, but you want to think through like, okay, well, if I was in that place, what might I want to know about? Well, if we give you 3 extra headcount, then how are they going to be using their time, for example? Like, so really just fleshing that out. That's kind of an obvious one, but that's, one example. Or if we invest in this new software, why would we invest in that one and not just do something like an alternative? But whatever the scenario is, really thinking through what they're going to ask so that you can proactively address that. And then last bit here is highlighting the risk or reward of either investing or not investing. So this is kind of one that I do pretty just like commonly, is speaking about, okay, well, if you don't invest in me, here's what we're leaving on the table. And investing in me, I mean like investing in my program, whatever the topic is. But if you don't invest further, for example, in the education team, then we're leaving the opportunity to drive XYZ goal. So really framing it as, here's the risk if we don't do this more. And here's the reward if we do invest more in the education team or in this particular program or in this software. So highlighting that risk reward helps executives understand and make decisions, because everything is about decisions. You don't have, of course, an endless budget. You have whatever the budget is, and the executives have to decide where to allocate that budget. So if we're going to allocate it to your cause, whatever it is you're wanting buy-in for, then you have to show all of these things: the long-term benefits, repeatable results, and risk reward of either investment or non-investment. So this is the process that I have followed. I haven't had a book out. It's really just kind of over the years, things that I have found that I've kind of done in repeatable ways that have enabled me to grow teams and grow my own career, which I'll go through. But what I wanted to highlight, and if you didn't get a chance to jot that book down, Influence Without Authority. What I wanted to highlight as far as the process that I mentioned about proactively addressing questions or concerns. So you may or may not have seen the Amazon PRFAQ, also known as the Working Backwards document. It's pretty commonly known now, especially in the product side of the business. So it's possible you maybe haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, I would 100% look into this. It's very easy to find information on the Amazon PRFAQ document. In fact, I got this little snapshot from productstrategy.com, which I'm not affiliated with, but I just found I liked this graphic that they had. So I mentioned that I worked at Amazon. This is where I learned about the Amazon PRFAQ document. It's a really great format. I'm going to just talk through it for a minute, because if you've ever heard of it, it's just something to keep in mind that might help you as you go to frame your request for buy-in or for extra budget or whatever it is. So the Amazon PRFAQ is a template that starts off with essentially a fictitious press release. So you write like a page or so press release on your product you're proposing, your process, your solution, your program, whatever it is, whatever the topic is. You write as if you're writing a press release to the public about this new venture. The purpose of that is to really first put yourself in the position of the value of this thing. Why is anyone going to care about this thing? So you're actually thinking about how you're going to tell the public or whoever the end customer is about this thing that you're gonna launch, build, grow, whatever it is. So it really helps kind of frame it. So you're thinking about the value, you're thinking about the potential impact, you're just building the excitement for it. You're thinking about like how this is going to change, workflows or whatever it is. So it's really kind of a great exercise for anyone to just be thinking about like why, if you want that executive buy-in, why? Why is this exciting to them? What is the impact of it going to be? So the press release is usually around a page, and it's just kind of a fun process too if you've never done that. Then the next section of the document is the frequently asked questions section. So you write this thinking about both your customer questions, and that could be external or internal customers, and other internal questions that may be from your leadership, for example, or your executive team. So this is the part where you're thinking ahead about what could possibly come up, what questions might come up here. So you have some basic questions around how does this work? How is it going to fit into my life? How do I access it? How do I use it? Whatever those questions may be. And then internal questions that stakeholders may ask you, like, well, what does this mean for the other team? Or what does this mean for, this project? But whatever questions may come up as you're proposing this thing, this is where you could write all that out proactively. And then the last piece there is really like the appendix, visuals, whatever makes sense to help kind of frame all of this. So it is, just to clarify, it's an internal document. It's not something that actually goes out into the world. But it really is an exercise called the Working Backwards document that helps you work backwards to know that you're actually proposing something that's impactful. So all of that's connected to getting stakeholder or executive buy-in, because again, whatever you want that buy-in for should be something that's going to benefit not just yourself, not just your team, but benefit the end user, the end customer, the company at large. And it really helps you think about and frame that. So I really wanted to plug that strategy because it's worked for me. And of course, I did use it when I was at Amazon, and I have used it in various forms since. Very frequently, I will do the frequently asked questions just because it's good to get in the mindset and have those things sort of mapped out. The other benefit to this when you're looking for executive buy-in is it really shows the executive team that you've done due diligence. You're not just asking for something, you're not just trying to get someone on board with like charm and charisma, but you've really thought about how this is going to roll out and how that additional investment is going to help the business and what it means and what catches may be there, or what challenges or what obstacles. So it really shows that you've done that work, and it gives you something to go to the team with rather than a conversation or even just like a slide deck that maybe is a proposal. You're really thinking through like kind of all sides of it. So whether or not you use it, certainly up to you, but it's something that has worked for me, and I do really love Amazon's. But this is one of Amazon's documents. There's other formats as well that can be really helpful, but this is a big one. Okay. So all that's to say, I don't want this to just be me as a talking head. I want to talk through, well, it is me as a talking head, I guess, but I want to talk through how I've, done this in a few different examples. So it's not just like kind of, I guess, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff out there that I feel like is not necessarily rooted in practical experience. So I'd like to connect this back to my experience to share with you. So my career journey, as I mentioned at the outset, I spent the first part of my career in higher education. And it was actually in that decade of work, just to date myself, the decade of work there, that I did start with this concept of getting executive buy-in. It's a little bit different in higher education, but it's the same idea. And one of the first examples of that was about the mid-aughts, when I was working as a professor, full-time instructor in this school. And I saw that there was a need to really partner with my department chair to do a variety of things that really weren't falling on his radar. For example, I just kind of fell into the love of curriculum, and I saw that our curriculum hadn't been updated in quite a bit of time, and I was proposing that we look at a project to really connect that curriculum more closely to the more modern industry needs at that time. So really, I was proposing a curriculum revamp. And I was proposing other projects to help students assess themselves along the way. So this was a more of a career technical school. It was animation and game art, and so it was like a 3-year straight program, and we didn't really have check-ins in place to help students quite understand if they were tracking. So I proposed this project to really help with these sort of year-long or yearly assessments. But all that's to say is what I ended up doing is building the case for an assistant chair role. And going back to the blueprint I just shared, first I had the advocate. I had built relationships not just with my chair, but with other chairs at the company and the dean. So I had, actually a few advocates at that time. I also had built, trust and confidence by having done this work and by having, good reviews as an instructor. So that kind of was inherent there. And then I really built the case for how this would benefit the organization at the time, because they had goals. They had goals for graduation. Any for-profit education is going to have goals around education. I mean, goals around graduation, goals for job placement. And so I connected this proposal into those goals. And I was able to get that buy-in to actually have this role crafted and step into that role. So for me, in the early parts of my career, getting that executive buy-in was about my own career growth. It was about scoping out new roles, scoping out the expansion of roles, and getting promotions so that I could build the career that I wanted to build. So it was really about like, I wasn't doing a team leadership at that time. So that was kind of the early onset of me working on executive buy-in. Moving forward into 2013, when I pivoted to the tech industry, that's where it became a bit more about expanded scope and connecting what I was doing from the education space. So this is when I brought education and training into organizations like Meta. So my first role it's Facebook at the time, I'm just going to call them Facebook. So my first role at Facebook was actually in product support. And they had our entire team, we were doing product support for certain apps, and they had our entire team pivot to supporting the mobile apps, which is quite different. If you've done anything in the technical end, you know that mobile coding is quite different from desktop, or at least it was then. So there was a pretty big pivot, and a lot of the team was struggling with that because there was nothing in place to help enable that pivot. There was no technical enablement at all in place. And I brought my technical background, my education background into this role and crafted out what it would look like for there to be a focus on this technical enablement. So again, if I go back to that blueprint, I found an advocate. So it was actually a manager on another team that believed in what I was doing and believed what value I could bring by bringing this technical enablement piece into the business. So I found that advocate. I understood and learned what mattered to the executives, which was that we had to get this team up to speed and supporting these products. And there wasn't an opportunity to really just like hire a bunch of new people. We had to really, it was an upskilling situation. So I connected into that need and those goals. And then I brought in like, well, what would this look like? If you actually pivot my role to focus on this enablement, here's the considerations that would happen. Here's what it would, the changes it would make. Here's the risk to doing it and not doing it. So I was able to do that and craft out this new role. And that's where I pivoted back into an education training role in the tech industry. I'm going to fast forward, talk about just a couple of other examples here now, more in a leadership role. Let's see, pivoting into now my experience at Amazon. So Amazon, I was hired to build out a certification program specifically. Amazon is as you might imagine, very, very large company, lots of different teams. And an interesting thing about Amazon, or at least it was then, is a lot of different teams working on like the same thing. And so you kind of find out that there's just teams in other departments that are actually working on the same product. And it's really kind of like, well, whoever does it best kind of does it. And so that was a bit of like a sort of a shock to come into that environment where I, was crafting out this certification program, but learned that there were a lot of other teams, or at least a handful of other teams, working on similar initiatives. And so I'm sure that a lot of you have seen this, this sort of competing or combination of siloed education teams and redundant sort of competing education teams. And I am not a fan of that. I really want to see like strategic alignment because not just because it's something I like, but because I really find that the value in that is going to far outweigh the other process of having just like all these silos and all these different initiatives in place. And so I kind of wanted to get that executive buy-in to craft a more unified approach to education in this department of Amazon. It was the ads department. And so that became my focus. And going back to finding an advocate, I found my advocate. My direct manager was a big advocate, and his manager, so my skip manager, was also a big advocate. And so they had the ability to kind of be my voice at the meetings above me, and mapped out what this would look like. What would it look like to be like an advertiser education team, and not just, you know, these sort of different initiatives? What would be the risk to doing that? What would happen to these other teams? How will they work together? So mapped all that out to really kind of craft this, and again, connected that into what mattered to the department at that time, what the goals were. How are we going to achieve goals better if we did this more unified approach? How are we going to be more efficient? How are we going to deliver more? How are we going to improve performance? And then what was it going to cost? And what would it cost potentially, like, lost opportunity if we didn't do it? So kind of crafting all of that to get this executive buy-in to create more of a unified approach to delivering the content, so that we had things in a more consistent way, more unified and holistic way. And that was really a great example, because we got that. And that was my experience at Amazon, was bringing all this together. And that continued for the years after my departure as well. So there was that. And just for time's sake, I don't know if I'll go into other examples, but I think that that's a few that really show, essentially, like, just going back to this, finding the advocate, building trust and confidence, but so important to connect what you're asking for into the strategy of what's happening already, into the strategy that executives care about, into the strategy that other department heads care about, and showing that that connection as you ask for that buy-in. So that really brings me to the sort of final part of this webinar that I think is really specific to the education world, and something to think about. When you do want to show that potential impact, or build confidence and show that you're already driving results, and or show the potential to drive more results with education, demonstrating the ROI from education can be really challenging, as you probably know. There's a lot of conversation around this. It's a very hot topic now. I've written some things on it myself. I actually have a webinar next month with a partner platform that's focused on this. So definitely this is going to be super high level, but I do want to just touch on ROI for education. Because of it being a strategic function, it really requires a strategy to show that you are essentially solving a problem or an opportunity for the business. And that's how you connect ROI. Now, what I will say is, this is my methodology that I practice myself, and that I practice with my clients, my ECDIS clients. So of course, there's other ways others talk about, measuring ROI from education. But for me, I really want to help teams and organizations tell a compelling ROI story. Because if you're going to ask for investment from executives, you have to show more than very loose correlations, which is often what I see with education and training initiatives, is those sort of loose correlations. Like, X number of people came into our customer academy, and we saw X% lift in retention. That's the beginning of the story, but it's not a connection enough for me as an executive to know, oh, well, let's invest more in that. And then how do we actually use that investment? Do we just, here's the money, but how are we actually, directing that investment? So what I show is, or what I implement, is this programmatic approach to education, which involves these 6 dimensions of education strategy. I'll just talk through them kind of quickly here, but the top left there starts with a program strategy. So again, starts with, what problem are you solving for the business with your education program? And that could be, you have multiple programs, but there could be one, going back to the market example, you're expanding markets, you're driving MQLs, could be about reducing customer churn. But really identifying the program of your education is going to help you connect the actual ROI of that program. And then the rest of this is really like, okay, once you identify your program, then you really want to get into your audience strategy, understanding the segments across your organization, and the ones that are directly relevant to that program. Then you structure your content specifically to drive the results of that program. Your delivery method supports that as well. So you choose your technology, your modalities to support the content you're delivering to the audience for that purpose of the program. The marketing bit is really just about how you're going to be communicating this to the right audience on an ongoing basis. So getting the right person to the content at the right time and then keeping that engagement going. And then lastly, that last dimension is the measurement piece. So this is where we're connecting leading and lagging metrics from the onset of the education, those engagement metrics, all the way through the efficacy of the content through to make sure that we are actually achieving the results of the program. And that leaves us with a measurement strategy. So this is a measurement strategy that I have on my site on Ecdys. You can find it at ecdys.com/resources. But this is essentially like the blueprint that I use with clients to help them see that ROI and use that ROI in their story to get executive buy-in. So the measurement strategy here, these are just two examples. If we had a program that was specifically around driving product adoption for enterprises, the opportunity there is we want to retain business from this certain segment, the enterprise B2B segment, by promoting adoption and stickiness. Our business metric may be NRR, and that's how we're going to actually measure and the final sort of impact of this program. We have our two different target audiences for this, an enterprise and an SMB audience. We have different behavior metrics we're tracking. So we want to see seat assignment from the enterprise. We want to see utilization from the SMB. And then the learning metric, we might have a quiz score. In the case, we typically want to have some kind of content efficacy score, but sometimes you don't. So like attendance in sort of like a backup plan. But this is where you connect this. So you connect, hey, we rolled out this education. We saw, X% passed the quiz. And then of that, we saw X% increase in utilization. And then from that, we saw that impact our final NRR. So that's kind of a high level, story, but it's threaded. And it shows that this program is driving and impacting this metric. It's not a one-to-one, which is a whole other conversation. We're not just seeing like a direct one-to-one, but we're showing kind of like influence and impact in a very cohesive way. So when you go speak to your executive team and you're looking for that buy-in, you can show, well, these are the programs we have today. Here's what's happening. With more investment, we can actually increase the learning metric. We can increase that efficacy. We can get more people to pass that exam if we invest more in the learning experience itself. Or we can get more people, we can get higher volume of people if we invest in an LMS or invest in whatever other technology. But you want to actually have this sort of threaded, compelling story to go to your executive team when you ask for that buy-in. It's not just sort of like open generic, but it's more targeted, it's more specific, and you're able to connect these dots to something that matters to the business, which again would be this business metric, NRR, MQL, whatever it is. So that's just very high level strategy, high level on my measurement strategy that I use, that I've used in various forms over the years and now implement with organizations. But again, this is really just to help frame a compelling conversation so that when you go to get that executive buy, even if it is, maybe you're not a team leader right now, maybe you are an IC and you're looking to have more of an expanded scope. So that just goes back to my examples I shared with my own career journey. It doesn't have to just be about teams and programs, but you think about the same sort of process for yourself. What are you driving today? How can you show the impact that you're making today, in a compelling way, and then show how further investment in you, expansion of scope, whatever it is you're looking for that buy-in for, can help move the needle. So I always think that things are going to be shorter than they are, but I think this was a pretty good timing. So that's really it for this webinar. I hope that it was that it left you with some nuggets and some value. I do want to, of course, just plug again what I do here. Ecdys is a full service business specializing in customer, partner, product, education, and training, so really end to end. And I do specifically work with organizations to help them not only be able to measure that ROI piece, but to show positive ROI, to actually like really show a compelling story there. And also on the side, I do coach, career coaching. I specialize in those who are in leadership roles or striving to be in leadership roles. So don't be a stranger. If we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please reach out. You can email me as well, and happy to answer any questions. Through email or through LinkedIn. and provide some guidance. But I thank you for your time. I know this is, especially if you're on the East Coast, it's a valuable lunch hour. And if you're in a different time zone, it's valuable as well. So thank you for trusting me with your time, and wish you all the best as you go for that executive buy-in.